Hey everyone, Duke Nougat 3D here with another clone comparison video because I am still very much out of content at the moment. So without further ado, let's get right down to these two beauties right here. The US ABC-M17 versus the infamous Czech OM-10. Obviously, the M17 was the original design, being introduced, it had been in development since the early 1950s, but was not officially adopted until the E13R9 prototype resulted in the pretty much final variation of the concept and was adopted as the field protective mask ABC-M17 in around 1959 or so. Could be earlier. I think these were actually approved in 1957, but weren't really adopted until 59, or at least widely issued until 59. But anyhow, yeah, so this is the original ABC M17, not an M17A1, as it obviously lacks the drinking tube and other features. So we're just going from the bare bones basic. Mine is an MSA-made example, dated 1967, and interestingly, I think all components on this particular example are dated 1967. I do know a lot of M17s would have had the C13 or C13R1 angle tube rubber cover replaced at some point in their lifespan, but this one is all original components, so that's fairly interesting. But anyhow, yes, this is the original design, obviously. Internal pork chop filters that we all know and hate, and just very basic features. I do not know when the first clone of the M17 originated. It might have been the Czechs that did it first, because I have seen OM-10 examples that are dated as early as the 1960s, so that leads me to believe that the Czechs were the first to clone the M17. However, they did do the design a little bit more justice than the Americans did, I will admit. There are a lot of designs on the OM-10 that are far greater than that of the US ABC M17, which I will get to here in this review. So the main advantage over the OM-10 with the M17 is that it is made out of a black rubber, and I think later on these were a high car and natural rubber blend. I'm not sure if that's how they all were. I think the earlier ones were just natural rubber like this one. I could be very wrong. But yes, for the most part, it's just black rubber as you know it, and that's the main advantage that the ABC M17 has over the OM10, where it is made out of a lighter tan colored rubber, which is known to very easily discolor, and it also has a with this Czech tan rubber, it's very notorious for blooming, which is the accumulation of a white waxy coating on the rubber, which is a result of preservative talcum powder mixing with evaporating sulfur from the rubber composition, and that's kind of an irritating thing that rubber does. So not the greatest, in my opinion. They could have went with black rubber, but for whatever reason they chose this tan color. It works. It's not a bad quality rubber. It just blooms a hell of a lot, and obviously being a lighter color is more prone to discoloration than black, whereas you obviously wouldn't really see it as much. But that's pretty much where the advantages end, as all the features on these masks are more or less the same, but with a few minor improvements. For one thing here, the filters. The US M17 series uses the M13 series filters. This one has a pair of M13A2 green ring filters installed in them, I believe, currently, and these are designed to protect against all known war gases. I mean, obviously when their lifespan was within expiry, which these are not, obviously, but anyhow, the main problem I have with the M13 filters, or just cheek filters in general, but using this one as an example, these are snap-on inlet valves. I do not like these. In fact, early on, the E13R9, and I think a couple of the earlier prototypes of the M17, had the inlet valves where there were little tabs that came off so you could help lever this out, and that's actually why this little cutout is right there, is for those little tabs that were originally present on the early inlet valves, but they later on got rid of those because they realized they were basically useless and they were more likely to bend and break off than actually help with levering these off. So yeah, that's the biggest drawback of the filters, other than, their inherent impossibility to change in the heat of combat, is the fact that the filter inlets are snap-on, and therefore they are a big pain in the ass to remove. However, the Czechs were smart about this, and instead of snap-on, these are screw-off, and I greatly admire this. Like, I don't like cheek filter masks in general, but if I had to choose one, I would obviously go for an OM-10 or an M10M, just purely for the fact that these screw off and do not have to snap on and off. But of course, that's to say that no cheek filter masks are good today as a result of the filters being very much proprietary and no longer produced. So just keep that in mind for all you preppers that go out and buy M10Ms, because I see a lot of you. But I digress. Back onto the situation at hand here. That's the main thing that I see the OM-10 improving upon, is the filters, how they screw on and off like that. It's much easier to work with. Another thing is the OM-10 got rid of a lot of the more redundant molding features that the M17 has. For instance, these temple bridges here. This is sort of a traditional feature that's been on US masks since probably before World War II, starting with the M2 series training masks and service masks. There would be a molded-in bridge for the temple strap webbing, and obviously the buckle is attached to an integrally molded piece of the rubber as a part of the face blank, and not a piece of webbing riveted into the face blank like on older masks. So this is kind of redundant. I don't know why they felt the need to include this as a part of the design. It doesn't really add anything. If anyone else knows why they thought this was a good idea, feel free to let me know. But yeah, this was one of the key features of the M17 that was more notably, prone to damage and more than likely broke first, I guess, if abused. But the Czechs obviously saw this as a redundant feature and they omitted it, and it works just as well without it. So props to them, I guess. And you may also notice that the buckle system is a bit more improved as well. It is a very simple, easy-to-use design that doesn't put a whole lot of stress on the mask. I'm really a huge fan of the tab-style buckle, where it just slips through a rubber tab like this, and, that's as good as what it needs to be. But obviously, this design isn't bad either, with the two prongs that slip through the rubber. However, this is another area where the mask is more often likely to fail first, also due to the fact that these buckle components are made out of copper or some sort of brass. I believe they are copper-plated brass, and then that has some sort of varnish or shellac over it, just some sort of blackening to prevent any of the metal from damaging the rubber, because rubber does not enjoy certain types of metal, particularly copper, and because this is copper-plated brass, in fact, the manual mentions to keep an eye out on these hardware components. So if these are wearing off, you might want to replace them, because that's going to end up damaging the rubber. And yeah, so not the greatest design. They probably could have made these out of something a bit less, damaging to the structural integrity of the rubber. But it's not a terrible design. It could have been better. But but personally, I believe that the Czechs did it a little bit more justice with the more benign and simple tab-style buckle, which I believe these are made out of, I think, some sort of aluminum. These are probably aluminum, so that's also another plus, is that because it's a non-ferrous metal that doesn't react negatively to natural rubber, it is completely, unintrusive to the structural integrity of the face blank. Other details to note is the outlet valves. As you may notice, that the ABC-M17's outlet valve, it has a single outlet valve completely protected by this cover. That's all good and well, and I do know this design is very easy to clear, and it works very well for that purpose. But the Czech OM-10 here, as you can see, like most Eastern Bloc masks, have a double outlet valve. This isn't really necessary, but it does add a greater degree of protection in case the main outlet valve does get blocked or trapped open with something, like say if dirt or debris or grass or hair managed to trap the outlet valve open and cause a very small, unnoticeable leak. It would happen entirely within the first valve out here instead of the second one, which is not likely to encounter as much debris as the first one, obviously. Although this is a little bit poorly protected, it does stick out quite a bit, and the cage is made out of aluminum, so I can see this getting dented. I can see it, and it doesn't really cover a whole lot of the valve. A lot can pass through there, so I mean, it does serve its purpose for protecting the actual main outlet valve from getting debris in it, but it kind of like was a gain and a loss at the same time, just because it's so poorly protected, but at the same time it does have that extra degree of security. So I guess it really isn't needed, but it's nice that it's there, I guess. But yeah, if you did get anything in the ABC-M17's eyelet valve, which you aren't as likely to do, but it's still a possibility, it's going to be a bigger risk because there is only one outlet valve. However, the M17A1, because it had that internal resuscitation feature, that air chamber did have a secondary outlet valve. However, that secondary outlet valve doesn't really serve a purpose because the air could just as well pass through the resuscitation tube because nothing is blocking that off. But anyways, enough about that. There really isn't too much else to compare these masks externally other than markings and things like that. I guess you could compare the harnesses a bit. There really isn't too much to note about the harnesses in terms of difference. The webbing is a little bit different in terms of its layout. Same basic principle though. I find the Czech one is a little bit more comfier because it has a wider degree of range it covers. It has a bit more surface area to it. And also the back of it is textured, so it has a better grip on your head. Whereas this, the C8R1 harness here, is just a nylon with some elastic material. It isn't really special at all. It does what it needs to. It's not uncomfortable, but it's not the best thing in the world. And I do find that the Czech M10 harness does have a little bit additional comfort to it. However, I will note that one downfall of the Czech M10 harness is the fact that it lacks a cross strap across the top of the head, whereas you compare it to the C8R1 here, it does have this cross strap to make sure that those straps are perfectly centered, whereas this one does not. And another thing is that the top straps are non-elasticated, so this can probably get a little bit uncomfortable compared to the C8R1 where these are fully elasticated. You don't really need these to be elastic because this is one of those harness positions that are currently fixed. It doesn't need to have a decent amount of stretch and ergonomics to it like the temple and the neck straps, but even still, it's kind of a feature that you maybe want for an extra degree of flexibility and comfort. But yeah, having just some hard canvas sit on the top of your head isn't the greatest thing, but it's not terrible. It does what it needs to at least, but that is one drawback of the M10 harness over the ABC-M17. I do believe both of these can accept optical inserts. I know the Czechs had their own optical inserts. I do believe they were pretty much the same principle as the M17 design, whereas the ones for the ABC-M17 were the wire skeleton frames that fit inside of the lenses. I'm sure you've all seen them. And I believe the Czech ones were a plastic material. I do believe I have photos of these inside of CM4s, but yes, the Czechs also were capable of installing optical inserts on their M10 mask. And in terms of the inside ergonomics, which let me flip around the harnesses and I will get to that in a moment, they are very much the same because the face blanks aren't that much different from each other. But there are a few things to note. Another thing I should note is that the sizing system is completely different as well, whereas the US ABC-M17 and M17 series in general go on a small, medium, and large basis. The Czech M10, I don't know how the Czech sizes work. It's numeric based, but it seems very inconsistent because this particular M10 is a size 2, which I would assume was like a medium or something, but I also have a CM4, which is a size 5, and that doesn't really fit all that much different than this, so I really don't know how the Czech size system works, but looking inside, there really isn't too much else to notice. The oronasal cup on the Czech M10 is a bit cushier and a bit broader, so on some faces it may be comfortable, but I do believe this was designed with some sort of ergonomics in mind, some sort of specific ethnic facial proportions, because this doesn't fit my face as well as a US M17. The Czech nose cups tend to be very cushy and very broad, that don't really a whole lot of room for the nose to protrude. If you have a larger or a longer nose, not to say that I do, but even still, but yeah, these are not for people with very broad or longer noses, just to get that out there because of the very cushy proportions of the inner oronasal cup. But other than that, everything else is pretty much the exact same with the M17 here. As you notice, the inner oronasal cup is a lot more benign in terms of its profile. Excuse me, bump the camera. And as you can see, it isn't as cushy, and it's very low profile in comparison with its face seal. But again, everything else is essentially the same. I do know that the edges of the face blank are a bit different as well. The edge, like the edged rim here, I guess you could call it, this little molding here, is a little bit more subtle and a bit cruder looking on the M17 than it is on the OM-10. it's about the same thickness and all, but once you get down to the chin area, you notice this little curved lip there, and that is to integrate with the OPCH-70 suit, which was designed for the OM-10, whereas the US ABC-M17 did not need that, as it used the M6 series chemical hoods, so there is no interned lip on the chin seal there. But other than that, pretty much it, really. There's not much else to mention about the two designs in comparison to each other. And, you know, for the time, they were decent masks, I assume, but I kind of have a personal bias to the Czech M10 just for the very slight features that are improved over the M17. And I know the Bulgarians ended up copying the OM-10. I know the Bulgarian clones kind of don't do it justice, because I was about to say, like, the OM-10 would have been a hell of a lot better if they just made it out of black rubber. And I know some of you are going to say, what about the Bulgarian PDE-1? Well, yes, that technically is an OM-10 made out of black rubber, but it also has a much shittier harness system, and the materials are a lot more lackluster. So, you know, kind of take that as you will. So anyways, that's pretty much it. I apologize for the lack of content lately. I'm trying to think of more things to do reviews about. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you have any comments, questions, corrections, or concerns, drop them in the comments below, and I will see you all later.